In this example, we are going to be finding the exact values of these sine functions using the sum formula. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down what exactly the sum formula is. We have sine of two angles being added, so we're going to call those angles alpha and beta. And the formula says that if we're adding two angles inside of our sine function, we can follow the rule sine alpha cosine beta plus cosine alpha sine beta. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this first example where we're looking for sine of 75, and we're going to find two angles that add up to 75. Now, 75 is not on my unit circle, but I can pick two numbers from the unit circle that will add up to 75. So I'm going to choose the angle 45 plus the angle for 30 because 45 is on my unit circle and 30 is on my unit circle. We're going to go ahead and apply our formula. Alpha is 45, beta is 30. So we get sine of 45 degrees, cosine of 30 degrees, plus cosine of 45 degrees times sine of 30 degrees. Whoops, 30, not 300. Now I'm going to look these values up on my unit circle and replace sine 45 with its actual value. So we go to our unit circle, I go to 45, and the sine value is square root 2 over 2. So I'm going to replace sine 45 with square root 2 over 2. Then we look for cosine 30. Go to our unit circle, 30 degrees. Cosine is square root 3 over 2. So I'm going to replace cosine with square root 3 over 2. Plus cosine at 45. Go to 45. Cosine is the x value, so it is square root 2 over 2. Times sine of 30. Go to 30. Sine is 1/2. So 1/2. Now we're going to go ahead and multiply each piece. So square root 2 times square root 3 is square root 6. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus square root 2 times 1 is square root 2. And 2 times 2 is 4. If we add these two together, we get our final result. The square root of 6 plus the square root of 2 all over 4. So this is a solution for my part A. Because square root 6 and square root 2 are not the same square root, we cannot add them together. So we leave it as square root 6 plus square root 2. Now let's look at letter B. Letter B is a little different because it is in radians. So let's try, I'll use a different color for this one. So we're going to pick two values that are going to add up to 5 pi. So here's the trick. We're going to take sine and I say 3 plus 2. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it over 12. Now if I were to rewrite this, write it out here, this reduces to pi fourths, and 2 pi over 12 reduces to pi 6. These two are on my unit circle, so we're going to follow the exact same steps and use our unit circle. So so I'm going to rewrite it. I'll write it down here. So I have sine pi over 4 cosine pi over 6 plus cosine pi over 4 sine pi over 6. Then we follow the same steps and look these up on our unit circle. So I'm going to go to pi over 4 and look at sine and cosine. So at pi over 4, both sine and cosine are square root 2 over 2. So right here underneath my sine pi over 4, I'm going to write square root 2 over 2 because that's what that equals. And for cosine, it also equals square root 2 over 2. For cosine pi over 6, we go to pi over 6. And cosine is square root 3 over 2. Sine is 1/2. So we go cosine is square root 3 over 2. And sine is 1/2. We multiply. And then we get our final answer by combining these into one fraction since they have a common denominator. So square root 6 plus square root 2 all over 4. All your answers are going to look quite similar. The only exception is going to be one will be positive, maybe one will be negative. So if you're getting answers that seem like it's repetitive, it's because think of your unit circle. All the points have the same values. The only thing that's changing is whether it's positive or negative depending on the quadrant. All right, so let's look at another example for the sum formula. This one is kind of like working backwards. What we're going to do is this time it gives me the formula all spread out already. I look at 80 and I look at 40. These are not on my unit circle, so I kind of have to work backwards here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label these, and or actually I can just look at the angles, and this tells me that alpha is 80 degrees and beta is 40 degrees. If we're using the sum formula, since this is plus, we take alpha and add it to beta. So that gives us 80 plus 40, which is 120. 120 is on my unit circle, which works out perfectly. This is the formula for sine alpha plus beta, which is 120. We go to our unit circle, we look at 120, and the sine value is square root 3 over 2. So this equals the square root 3 over 2. And that's the final answer. So the trick is to take these two and decide, are we adding? Or, like in the next set of videos, are we subtracting?